Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for a video that's been very requested on the channel because we got a lot of Washington Wizards fans that watch this channel super frequently. So if you're a Wizards fan, welcome to the channel. We'd love to have you join the community that we're building here at Utility Sports with a lot of Wizards fans. So you'll probably see some of them in the comment section. Shout out to Big J52 specifically. He's one of my favorites, always in the comment section, spreading some love and positivity. And then this Washington Wizards offseason preview is going to be a very fun yet realistic video where I break down where the Washington Wizards currently sit. And we'll talk about all of that and more in this video, which I'm very excited for. In this video preview, we're going to start off with the season recap. Then we'll look at the potential of dealing Bradley Beal, which is going to be a very interesting topic of discussion for a brand new GM and president of basketball operations after Tommy Shepard was let go. Ted Leonsis, clearly not wanting to miss the playoffs, said so in kind of his presser on why Tommy Shepard was let go. We'll talk about the position of GM and how attractive that could potentially be in a little bit. We'll also look at the 2023 NBA draft, both in terms of their lottery odds to move up, but then also potential realistic options for them to draft around the pick that they're projected to land at. We'll also look at free agency. Their situation is very unique, very different from a lot of the other teams that we've already discussed on the channel, which really excites me to discuss it here in this video. It's a fun, kind of refreshing way to look at free agency in the landscape and how Washington, with their kind of already a little bit more established roster, has some different tasks and some different challenges when it comes to free agency, both in retaining guys and then also trying to add in more talent, which I think they need. And then we'll finalize this video with an early outlook of next year. And again, I'm going to keep this video very realistic. It might border on the side of pessimism in some people's minds, but I'm going to call a spade a spade. You guys know I do that here on the channel. And I'm very excited for how everything's going to play out. And I think Washington's a team that we have to keep our eyes on. But before we move on in this video, let's take a listen to a word from our sponsors. Today's video is brought to you by Mummy. Are you tired of waking up tired? Well, your pillow probably sucks, but it doesn't have to. I'd like to introduce you to Mummy, a bedding brand that is revolutionizing the sleep game with their innovative 6-chamber pillow. Their patented 6-chamber design secures the filling in place so their pillow never becomes lopsided or loses support. It also features breathable mesh to keep you cool throughout the night. A better and more productive you starts with better sleep. Go to mummysleep.com and use code UTILITY for 15% off plus free shipping. That's MVMIsleep.com and code UTILITY for 15% off plus free shipping. With free shipping and free returns, there's no reason not to try it out. I know I've absolutely loved it. So now getting into that season recap here. At 35-47 this past year, they finished 12th in the Eastern Conference, and typical Washington Wizards fashion, they started the year fairly well, and people said, wow, is this team kind of a sleeper in the East? They're making some noise early, and just like usual, that noise early faded away, and by the end of the year, we really saw what they are, which is not a very good basketball team. But they did have some really bright spots on this roster. Kristaps Porzingis being one of them. Last year at the trade deadline when he got dealt by the Dallas Mavericks, I said next year he's going to average 20 and 10 pretty comfortably. And he was right in that ballpark. 23 points a game this year. And I think one thing about Kristaps Porzingis that has been very underrated throughout the duration of his career, specifically since he first got to Dallas and then therefore afterward, he's a very underrated rim protector. In fact, you compare his defensive metrics at the rim to Defensive Player of the Year Jaren Jackson Jr., to Defensive Player of the Year runner-up Brook Lopez, and Kristaps Porzingis is right in the ballpark with those two guys when it comes to shots impacted at the rim and ability to deter shots, and also just forcing misses within the restricted area. Kristaps Porzingis does a very good job of that. Also, laterally, he's more mobile than a guy like Brook Lopez. I think Porzingis is a very underrated player across the league. Of course, a lot of people do have questions about his availability and just his overall health in general, which, is fair. He's missed a lot of time throughout the duration of his career, just with, missed time with injuries. Obviously, the ACL came into effect too back in New York, but he played 65 games this year. 32 minutes, averaged 8.5 rebounds, almost 3 assists, which I believe was nearly a career high for him, if not a career high. So Porzingis had a very nice year. I'm very happy for him. As a Mavs fan myself, I don't want him to fail because the Mavericks traded him. In fact, I want to celebrate his success. Just because Dallas wasn't the right destination for him, the right situation, which I think was a mistake by them to trade him. I think Washington did a good job jumping in on that. That's one of Tommy Shepard's few moves that I've really liked. Bradley Beal, another very good player. We're going to talk about that contract here in a second. I don't want this part of the video to be about the contract, though. Bradley Beal is just a fantastic basketball player. He's somebody who, as a scorer, obviously has had seasons where he puts up 30-plus points a game. Did not do that this year. And, of course, has missed time over the last few years as well with some injuries that I think has hindered his performance, as well as the team's success to a certain extent. So for Beal, I'm kind of hoping he can settle back into being a high-volume scorer efficiently and really helping this Washington team win by staying healthy, being on the court for them. But we just haven't seen that the last couple of years as much, and that's kind of the undertone as to why the Wizards haven't been as successful internally and throughout the course of a couple seasons now as they'd like to be. Kyle Kuzma had another big step forward in his career this year. I think Washington's really given him a good platform and runway in growing his career. You kind of think about the negative hits that Russell Westbrook has taken on his character and his, basketball profile across media. Since this trade, I think it's kind of the complete opposite for Kyle Kuzma. It's opened up his game, given him the opportunity to flourish specifically statistically. So for anyone who lives on Basketball Reference, I mean, Kyle Kuzma is somebody who sticks out to you, averaging over 20 points a game, doing so efficiently. He's always been a good rebounding wing. And I think defensively took a nice step forward this year as well. Kuzma is somebody who he is going into free agency. We'll talk about that later on in this video. He's looking to secure the bag, and I think his statistical output, despite losing quite a bit this year, still suggests that he's going to get paid. Corey Kispert, I really, really loved the season that he had. I think Corey Kispert's one of the more underrated players in the league, specifically because you look at him and, the things you expect him to be good at, he's good at. But he shot 42% from three this year. He's an absolute flamethrower behind the three-point line, always has been, always will be. When he came out of Gonzaga, I was very, very glowing on him as a player because I just thought, look, yeah, maybe he doesn't come into the league and ever average 20 points a game, but the likelihood of finding 8 to 10 guys who do that in a draft class is pretty low anyway, typically. So the fact that I was very confident that Kispert could walk in and be able to average an 11 or 12 points a game at some point relatively quickly into his career like he did this year, and doing so efficiently, playing within an offense. He's never a ball stopper, really. He excels in transition. He's actually a very good transition player and had some real bright moments for the Wizards this year. I think he's a little bit more athletic than people would give him credit for, although I wouldn't say it's a strong suit for him. It's not something his agent would argue about in contract negotiations. But specifically, the three-point shooting makes him a fit on any team. And if you're looking at Washington as kind of core pieces, he's somebody who, regardless of what a new face in the front office would look to do, Corey Kispert, somebody who's likely going to be able to fit in with any kind of style, any type of personnel changes. Kispert, probably somebody they'd like to keep, and I think that's very well deserved. I'm still really high on Denny Avdia as well. I think Turbo Denny is somebody who is a legitimately very good basketball player. And I just don't think Washington gets the national media shine. And I don't think Denny Avdia so far has gotten any of the national media shine that he deserves. Now, I know at times he's very passive with his selection offensively, and sometimes the shots aren't falling for him. But defensively, he and Kristaps Porzingis have been a fantastic duo together on the court since KP arrived in Washington. I think those two players, Avdia and Porzingis together, is a really good mesh pairing with Avdia's perimeter defensive skill set. He's got very active hands, able to strip down on the basketball very well. And then Porzingis's natural length and size pairs well with Avdia's ball pressure and forcing teams into bad shots around the rim and just on the outside of the paint as well specifically. So I think KP, Avdia, two players that I would like to see continue to play together long term. Now, Porzingis, again, he has a player option as well, like Kuzma. So we could see Porzingis maybe change scenery. On his Instagram, he definitely alluded to that a little bit. So we'll have to see what happens with Porzingis. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Daniel Gafford averaged about a block and a half a game this year. The Wizards were actually one of, I think, only 2 or 3 teams this season to have 2 players finish in the top 15 in total blocks. Those 2 players were Gafford and Porzingis. That's, another nice building block. Rim protection is very, very important when you're building team defense. Now, I do think the Wizards are lacking in other areas. I think they could still use more perimeter defense, specifically from the guard spot, a little bit more quickness out in the perimeter defensively. But Gafford, in a limited role, I think is the best way to play him and view him. I don't think he's a starting center in the league if you want to be a 50-win team. That's just my reality on him. But having a guy who could come off the bench and play 20 minutes a game and block a shot or two and, pour in 6 to 8 rebounds a night, that's valuable. And a lot of teams in the league don't really have that type of player who can come off the bench. If you can get Gafford into that type of role, I think a player that, I think back to for Dallas back when they made a championship run is Jan Mahimi kind of filled that void a little bit of what I see Gafford maybe becoming on a good team. And I know, Wizards fans maybe just let out an audible groan when I said Jan Mahimi's name because he got a bag from Washington after that championship run with Dallas. But I think that's a great example of what I'm talking about here. Jan Mahimi was a little overstretched in Washington and asked to do too much, and it just wasn't productive in terms of winning and losing. But I think in the right role, Gafford could be a very productive and helpful player, especially when you have other pieces that help limit his minutes and put him in scenarios that are going to benefit the team. Johnny Davis had a really, really rough rookie season, especially to start. His time in the G League to begin the year was very, very, very poor. In fact, he was just looking like a bad G League player, which you never want from a guy you just picked in the top or in the lottery. And Johnny Davis was a player who, coming into last year, into the draft, I thought that there is scoring potential, there is scoring upside. But I was a little unsure about his fit, and funny enough, I had mocked Johnny Davis to Washington for basically a month and a half before the draft because that was Tommy Shepard's MO, was drafting guys who were good college players for the most part. Did it with Rui Hachimura, Corey Kispert, Johnny Davis became the latest example. And ultimately, some of those decisions led to Tommy Shepard finding his way out the door. Like I said earlier in the open, Ted Leonsis lets him go. Tommy Shepard probably lands in a front office somewhere else in some lesser role, but still a prominent role where he's going to have a little bit of say and decision-making power in a front office. I'd assume just based on his track record. He's been with Washington since 2003. So he's somebody who has a foot in the door in this league. I think we'll hear Tommy Shepard's name again in the future, but it won't be for Washington, which is, I think, a very, very good situation for them. And ultimately, that final little tab there, the bye-bye Tommy Shepard, is the most important one out of all of them, because having the right decision maker in a place where you can trust that he's going to make the right calls and make the right decisions when it comes to draft night, trade deadline, something that I just don't think Tommy Shepard really ever did. And it's unfortunate because I think Washington has some very passionate fans who've stuck with this team through a lot of down years and kind of rough decisions, honestly. So the fact that they're making a move and they're looking outside of the organization, I think is a very good step in the right direction. Now, of course, they still have to make the right hire. The job's not done here. You can take all the right steps and you still might not execute it properly, but at least they're taking the right steps. That's the first place you need to look if you're Washington, is outside of the organization. Bring in someone who you trust to build a team. And I'm very interested to see if they wait until after the draft lottery to potentially hire a GM or president, because I think that this is one of the lesser attractive openings on the market. Now, I know it is still a GM and president role, but I don't think Ted Leonsis wants to break the bank in terms of paying somebody who's really qualified. So potentially moving up in the lottery could help kind of incentivize a GM or president to come over and really take this Washington team and try and retool and rebuild this entire roster, which I think there's a lot of work to be done. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but Tommy Shepard's vacancy is going to be filled by somebody who I think is going to be a better decision maker than him. Some names that we've already heard: Masai Ujiri, who of course Washington had interest in a few years ago. Ultimately, nothing got done there. I would not be shocked if Masai Ujiri does become the next GM of the Washington Wizards, although Tim Connolly's name has also been brought up, which is very interesting. Of course, Tim Connolly just recently made the Rudy Gobert deal, so we'll see if he kind of jumps ship on what he's built in Minnesota there. Trajan Langdon's another name that's been brought up as well. And also, I know a lot of Wizards fans are hoping for Bob Myers, who's actually GMing out his contract, something I've never said in my life before, by the way, GMing out his contract because he doesn't have a contract going into next year with the Golden State Warriors. So Bob Myers would be a very interesting and high profile hire as well for Washington. He's somebody you'd have to break the bank for a little bit, especially if they don't move up in the draft lottery. But I think Washington needs fresh eyes and fresh decision making there, and I'm glad that they're moving in that direction. So overall, kudos to them for that decision. Now we go into the big question here on Bradley Beal. To deal Beal or not to deal Beal? And I'm going to be quite frank here. You heard how glowing I was about Bradley Beal. I think he's a fantastic player, a fantastic talent, somebody who can really help you win games if you have the right pieces around him and if he's healthy. The issue, though, and I'm going to say this, and you have to be very, very attentive to what I'm about to say. Despite Bradley Beal being a very good player and an all-star-ish level player, he's on the worst contract in the NBA. In my opinion, it is an immovable contract, and I've heard it floated out there that, oh, what would Washington get for Bradley Beal? A first, 2 firsts, someone said 4 firsts one time I was talking to. I said, what are you talking about? Bradley Beal is somebody you'd have to, in my opinion, if I was trying to trade for Bradley Beal, my expectation for the team taking him in is that you're going to give me some loose assets back with his contract. Because yes, he can help me right now. He can help me this year, next year. But look at this contract. He's already 30 years old. Going into next year, he's making nearly $47 million. And with the new CBA that changes the second tax threshold, which we're going to make a video on at some point here on the channel, hopefully this week or next week, that really breaks down all of those ins and outs. And I spent a lot of time researching it. Bradley Beal's contract might be a death note with the way the new CBA is written and some of the roster building limitations when it comes to spending. Bradley Beal, I mean, look at this. 2026, 2027, he has a player option. He's going to be in his mid-30s making $57 million. I can't even justify $57 million for him right now. I know the salary cap's going to go up, but it's not going to go up enough that makes Bradley Beal making $57 million as nearly a 35-year-old look good. And for me, as they would say in Shark Tank, for that reason, I'm out. If I were to trade for Bradley Beal, I would need Washington to give me stuff. And if you're a Wizards fan, you might say, well, then we're not trading Beal, which is probably the end-all, be-all of that discussion. It doesn't make sense for Washington's perspective to deal him if they have to attach things to him. So, honestly, this summer, I think they really, really need to shop big time a Bradley Beal deal to see if any of the other 29 teams in the NBA are semi-interested in taking him in. And honestly, if you can get 2 or 3 second-round picks for him, I would think it's a home run. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know people are going to be mad at me in the comments for saying this, but this is the reality, okay? Find me a GM that says, wow, I'd love to have that contract the next 4 or 5 years. It doesn't exist, okay? That GM is not out there. Nobody wants to sign up for Bradley Beal for the next 4 or 5 years. I would be shocked if he net 2 first-round picks. I'd be absolutely blown away by that. If a team did that, that team would be an instant loser in my eyes for making that trade. And it's not because Beal's bad. Beal's a very good player. But you just long-term team building wise, this makes 0 sense for a team to acquire Bradley Beal. And I think Washington is ultimately pinned with his contract. And this is the second time Tommy Shepard did this, by the way. He did it, John Wall was set up with a contract similarly that became immovable. Essentially, they flopped it for Russell Westbrook and had to attach a pick even for Russell Westbrook's enormous contract at the time too. Bradley Beal, I mean, just look at the money here. I don't have to say anything more about this. Just take a mental picture of this, and next time you hear someone talking about a Bradley Beal trade, say, what am I getting? Because I look at the price. Look at the price point. It's just, like I said, on Shark Tank, and for that reason, I'm out. We move on to the next part of the video, which is really one of the most important parts, and that's the NBA draft lottery odds, where we see Washington actually move down to the 8th best odds in this year's draft with a tie with Indiana. So they have nearly a 7% chance of moving up to the number 1 pick, which would be Victor Wembanyama, which is, of course, super, super good if you could land a guy like Victor Wembanyama. Everything that I'm saying in this video and everything I'm going to say later on in this video becomes a moot point if Victor Wembanyama is playing in Washington, which is a real possibility. There's a pretty good likelihood. They have about 50% of the chance that Detroit has for being the worst team in the league. with Adam Silver's new lottery rules and how everything plays out and works, Washington has a legitimate chance to move up into the top 4. In fact, if we add all of these odds together, you're looking at nearly a 28 to 29% chance to move up into the top 4, which could be franchise altering. So May 16th, 2023, we'll be live on the channel here when it's going on. We're going to have a ton of videos coming out on the channel before that date. That is the date of the NBA draft lottery. That is one of the most important dates of the year and of Washington's franchise, because with where they're currently at, they really, in my opinion, need some lottery luck. You see, they have a 33% chance basically to be picking 8th overall, a 31% chance to be picking 9th. And while those picks, you can still get good players in this year's draft, it's just comparatively to a top 4 pick in terms of draft value and kind of how confident I feel in a guy hitting at that spot, it does make a big difference. And the Wizards, I think, would be really benefited, specifically if they moved up into the top 2 this year or the top 3 with a chance at Amen Thompson. I would really like that as well for the Washington Wizards. So, you know, kind of a tough draw if they don't move up there, but I think it's really important that night for them, the potential to possibly do so, which leads us into some draft prospects that maybe they would look to consider around pick 8 if they were not to move up. So this could be pick 8, pick 9. We saw about a 64% chance that they'll land in one of those 2 spots. And Anthony Black is a guy that really stands out to me out of Arkansas. If you've been watching the channel for a while now, you know I really love Anthony Black's game. I think he's somebody who's going to stick in the NBA for 12 years, 12 to 15 years. He's going to have a nice long career, make a lot of money, and really impact winning. I think that's one of the big things about Anthony Black that I noticed is in Arkansas's run in March Madness, and beforehand I was able to predict that fairly well. I picked them to beat Kansas in March Madness because I trusted Anthony Black as an impact player. And I thought he's going to be a guy that helps them win because he's big, lengthy. I thought he matched up well with Kansas, and for the most part, he had a really nice game in terms of controlling pace, kind of disrupting the other team's better perimeter players. And Anthony Black, to me, is somebody that I do really like, just with his overall playmaking skill set. A player, if you're looking for a kind of loose comparison, Josh Giddey is a good guy to compare him to. Now, I think his playmaking feel out of the pick and roll is a little bit worse, but I do think he's kind of a quicker, safer downhill decision maker. I think he'll turn over the ball a little bit less. And I also think defensively, he's got significantly more upside on that end of the floor. Now, I think he's a little bit less of a scorer type, but he does have some traits that you like as a slasher in terms of his physical athleticism. At 6'7", he jumps off of 2 feet well. I like Anthony Black a lot. I think he would fit Washington because one of the big questions around Washington for me the last 3-4 years has been who's going to be the point guard long-term, because I just, John Wall with all the injuries, and then Russell Westbrook, I didn't think was a long-term investment by them. And then ultimately, they tried the Monte Morris thing. They've experimented with everything, trading for Aaron Holiday. It's been disaster after disaster after disaster. And for me with Washington, I think Anthony Black would really give them some nice stability. As a young guard, I trust him. And that's really one of the most important things for Wes Unseld Jr. Having a point guard he can trust probably would be a first in his tenure as the Wizards head coach. Cam Whitmore, forward out of Villanova, didn't quite have the freshman season a lot of people were hoping for, but still the physicals, the tools are there for him to become a very good premier wing in this league. If everything were to kind of hit in his development, if the shot making translates and improves through the first couple of years of his career, he could become a very special player. He's got the strength, he's got the slashing capability. He's going to be able to drive his line and not get bumped off of it with how strong of a driver of the basketball he is. Taylor Hendricks and Jarris Walker are 2 players that, to be honest, if they're picking 8th or 9th, I don't think they're going to be on the board. Hendricks, to me, is probably going to go 6th or 7th overall. Walker's probably going to go 5th or 6th. I like them, though. Ausar Thompson, I don't have him listed here on the screen. Another forward type that would really intrigue me around pick 8 if he's there. And to be honest, he's kind of one of the upside swings that I think Washington probably should consider, just given the fact that right now with where they currently sit, I'm looking at it long term and I'm not really sold. Again, I don't want to spoil too much of what's coming on later in the video, but I think Washington's in a tough spot compared to some of the other teams in the league. And then we look at the free agency situation. They're projected negative $18 million in cap space. Some of you might be saying, how does that work? If you don't know how cap space works, it's a very unique niche situation that's very different from, say, the NHL. Obviously way different from the MLB that has a completely different cap system. In the NBA, you can have negative cap space, but there's luxury rules. There's all these things that go into it. At some point, I'll have a video on the channel that completely describes everything about cap space. And, I'm a nerd, so I know all of this stuff because I spend my free time reading the collective bargaining agreement for fun, because that's how I am as a person. And that's why I have a YouTube channel like this, because that's how I am. Kristaps Porzingis, though, has a player option with that projected negative $18 million in cap space. Some of these cap hold numbers are considered into this and how Washington would look to keep them. So theoretically, if Washington were to clear the books and move off of guys, they could become somewhat free agency contenders, but I don't really love that pathway for them either, just with how free agency is shaping up this year. Maybe one of the prized possessions for them would be like an older James Harden, which I just don't really think they have a pathway to even landing him anyway, or maybe like overpaying Fred VanVleet, which, does that move the needle for you? I don't really know. I just ranted about how their point guard position's been terrible, so maybe. But, I think keeping some of their in-house talent makes more sense, and then giving the GM a little bit of time to ultimately make some decisions on their own and figure out what they want to continue to do. Kyle Kuzma also has a player option. I referenced both of those two guys. Those are, that's 40 something points a game that they're losing from their lineup this year. If both of those guys were to theoretically leave in free agency, I think Kuzma is perhaps a bigger flight risk than Porzingis. At least that's what I felt going into this offseason. But now I actually almost feel the other way about it, just because of something that happened semi-recently. So, there's a lot that you could potentially worry about with how the offseason could go for the Wizards. And then Monte Morris and Delon Wright will also be entering the final years of their deals. So if they were looking to offload some money in a different way, trading both Morris and Wright as expirings could open up some theoretical money. Say Kuzma or Porzingis were to dip in free agency, the Wizards could open up some cap space that way. But I don't really see that being the way that they look to go. So when it comes to options to improve, really keeping Kuzma is at the top of the list. I think there's no way that they're going to lose Kyle Kuzma. And the reason I say that here about Kristaps Porzingis is he actually on his own Instagram thanked the organization and said he loved every minute of being in a Wizards uniform, and basically implied that perhaps he's done playing in Washington. Now, it's also just an end of the year post, and maybe he's just trying to be reflective on how the season went and just thanking the fans in general. And perhaps, he's also Latvian, so perhaps he sent a message that he didn't mean to send in terms of how fans read it and perceived it. But to me, it did seem like he was maybe strongly going to consider other options in free agency if he were to opt out of that $36 million player option. So we'll see what exactly happens there. But to improve, they do have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to them, but there is some difficulties with that. A guy that would maybe fit into that is Grant Williams, but how much does Grant Williams really improve this team? Does he really impact some of the flaws that they have already on their roster? And the one thing too is a lot of these guys who sign for mid-level exceptions, yes, they want to get paid. They want a nice, rich contract over the duration of 3 or 4 years, but they also typically want to go to a team that's going to be playing playoff basketball. And I don't think the last couple of years have instilled a lot of belief in agents and players that, Washington's the place to go to do that. So realistically, they probably, either have to overpay a guy on that mid-level exception, a guy who's maybe not worth the full mid-level. They maybe have to give him the full mid-level to get him there, which I wouldn't recommend doing that with some of the new CBA rules. So it's possible that they turn to the biannual exception, which is roughly $4.448 million that you can sign a player to annually. Gives you kind of a heads up, kind of a leg up over the competition that maybe is offering just minimum contracts to that player. And then also on top of that, they have minimums to offer. They can offer players that's minimum, which, that's not very competitive, and it's not the best way for a team like Washington to land a lot of guys. The nice thing is they do have a decent amount of their roster locked in. Outside of like the Porzingis, Kuzma flight risk, outside of that, they do have a lot of players under contract. So it's not like this team's going to have an issue with fielding, a roster of 15 guys plus two-way players. They're going to have a full roster, but again, this roster that they're going to have just proved that they were like a 35-win team. So do you want to just run it back completely? That's a big question. I think that they could realistically look at some trade maneuvers, but with a new GM coming in, do you want to pull the trigger on something like that early, or do you want to kind of get in the building, get to know everybody, take a little bit of time, and logistically, that's kind of a hard thing to do. Is you just show up and all of a sudden, well, we're pulling a trigger on a deal, when realistically, you probably didn't watch all 82 games. If you're an outside GM coming in, you don't know everything about this roster that you need to. You don't know everything about the individual people on the team. You don't know anything about Wes Unseld Jr. as a coach yet, really. There's a lot of logistical stuff that I don't think a lot of people keep in mind when it comes to, oh, this is literally going to be their brand new GM's first day, maybe in the Washington Wizards facility when he first starts. Is the first thing he's going to do get in his office and call, say, the Boston Celtics trying to make a trade, or some other team? Probably not. The answer to that is probably not. So I think that Washington, while I think trades could make some sense for them and kind of reshuffling their roster and making some moves, there's some actual logistical components to that I think limit the likelihood of seeing some of that this offseason. So the early outlook for this team, and I do want to, before I say this, I do want to commend Wizards fans again. So if you are a Wizards fan, thank you so much for, first of all, watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and if you felt like this was an accurate detail on what a potential offseason could look like for Washington this year. And I know you guys have stuck through some really, really down years. You think about the big three with Nick Young, Andre Blatch, and Gilbert Arenas. I mean, I've seen it all with the Washington Wizards, and I know you guys have as well. Of course, the John Wall era was so fun, and the team actually made quite a bit of playoff noise, and was a pretty good team, honestly, year in, year out, seemingly in the East. And I'm kind of sad. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here, but I'm going to be quite frank about this. I think Washington has one of the worst futures in the NBA. With where they're currently situated, that Bradley Beal contract, which I perceive as immovable, the potential flight risks of Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma in a market where there's a lot of cap space this summer and potentially could lose those two for nothing, theoretically, if things were to really, really go poorly for them. That would be an absolute disaster. There's also the likelihood that, hey, maybe they don't move up in the draft lottery and they get the 8th or 9th best player in the draft, which I think is a very good draft to get the 8th or 9th best player, but still it's the 8th or 9th best player. Is it a franchise changer? No, it's a good building block, but is it somebody who's going to help elevate your team by 10 to 15 wins within the first 2-3 years of their career? Maybe not. And, because of that, I just have some real serious concerns about Washington's ability to improve without making some absolutely mind-shocking trade that I don't foresee right now. I think that Washington's kind of capped. And with the likelihood that I ultimately do think they keep both Porzingis and Kuzma, which is honestly, I feel like their best option. As of right now, it's just still not a good option because the team's not very good. They're going to be locked into players on contracts. And I just don't really see a way for them to get out of mediocrity. And that's one of the big concerns, is this is not something that I think is going to be an expedited retool where, hey, maybe we tank down and get into the worst 3 teams in the league for the next 1 or 2 years and try and add a top end talent. Plus, you don't want to do that anyway going into this 2024 NBA draft, because outside of Matas Buzelis, I just don't really love the class that much in 2024. As you can tell, I've already started my draft process prep for that. As well, I've been watching a lot of those kids for quite a while. I've watched Matas Buzelis for about 3 years now. So 2024 is not really a class that I want to get involved with tanking for. Now, if you get the first pick, you're still going to be happy, but it's not like this year's draft where there is a guy out there that could be franchise changing in Victor Wembanyama, which is why I have to clarify what I'm saying here. If Washington were to win the lottery or move up into the top 2 or 3, it completely refreshes this team, completely revitalizes and revamps everything that we've seen on this roster. Because Scoot Henderson would be the starting point guard on day one, and he would become the ultimate face of the franchise at some point. Amen Thompson, I think, would be the starting point guard on day one. And yes, he's very raw. I think there would be a long learning process for him, and the team probably wouldn't win a ton. I think he's got a seriously high upside. And then if they get the first overall pick, Victor Wembanyama plus Kristaps Porzingis plus Bradley Beal plus Kyle Kuzma is probably good enough to make a lot, and I mean a lot of noise, especially with Daniel Gafford off the bench. You become a way more attractive destination in terms of bringing in other pieces, other players. A point guard maybe and a sign-in trade could open up. That's where DeLon Wright, his contract could be used in a trade, as well as Monte Morris's. And there is a pathway with the assets that they have that all of a sudden they make a win now move if they get Wembanyama. If we find out on May 16th that they're able to draft Victor Wembanyama first overall, it changes this team from becoming maybe at some point the laughingstock of the league or the definition of mediocrity at best to maybe a team that we see making a deep Eastern Conference playoff push within the next 2 years. And it's, that's goes to show how important this draft lottery is on May 16th. I keep hyping it up on the channel. One, because I'm very excited about it. I can't stop thinking about it. Literally the last, pretty much since the regular season ended, it's been on my mind pretty much 24/7. But just overall, Victor Wembanyama is such a transcendent player, such a transformational player offensively and defensively, with game-changing length and shot-making upside, and he's an overall great player, and I think would be a really fun player to watch in Washington. Just think about the length in the front court with him and Porzingis. It'd be fun, but again, it's only a 6.8% chance or 6.7% chance, to see him land there. So is that something you want to hype yourself up on, or is the realistic option one that's a little bit more pessimistic, that this team's not going to be very good? They're going to be at best mediocre, and that's going to be for a while. It's just, I don't see a clear out for them. They're going to have a lot of stuff go right to get there. Now, I've been wrong before. I'm hoping for Wizards fans that I'm wrong again, but I really just don't feel that way. This new GM president that they hire, I think, is going to have a lot of work to do to improving this roster and kind of shifting not only this team, but also the culture of the organization into a winning organization. They just haven't been. You think back the last 20 years, this team's just not won that much. So I'm hoping for them. I'm hoping for Wizards fans who are, big diehard fans, very loyal fans. I want to see this organization have success. I want to see them win. It's just going to be a long process to get there, in my honest evaluation as of right now, assuming they don't move up into the top 3 or 4 in this year's draft. Thank you so much for watching. Really did enjoy breaking down the Washington Wizards. This has been, in fact, one of my favorite offseason previews to talk about, because there's so many different directions that you can look for this organization in terms of, Bradley Beal's contract, the players that are impending free agents in Porzingis and Kuzma, a GM change, front office, role management, maneuverability, also looking at their draft picks and the need to maybe move up in the top 4. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did as well. Again, if you thought that video was either very enjoyable or very accurate and descriptive into what a potential offseason could look like, I'd really urge you to leave a like on the video. It lets me know I'm doing a good job here. Subscribe to the channel for more as well. Love for you to check out some of my other offseason previews, breaking down all the other teams in the NBA that I've covered so far. Also, leave a comment down below who you would like to see me record a video on next, because I always love reading the comments and seeing what you guys have to say. So thank you again so much. Really do appreciate each and every one of you. I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.